State your name, please.
Louise Melanson. The economic aspect hasn't been brought up tonight, besides the poisoned water, poisoned air, destroyed land forever. And the price of gas is very low, and people have questioned whether it's worthwhile to do this at all, even if how it can be economically viable. And what I've been reading is discussing the kind of Enron mark-to-market kind of economics, where it's based on leveraged land swaps is where the money's made. It's about the land, it's not about the gas at all. Does anybody have any information about that aspect of it? And one more thing, I'm just about to do both of them while I'm up, is what's the lifespan of the casings and when that's, I mean, they don't last forever. Even if they're well done, what's the life expectancy? So eventually there is going to, it's a time bomb, I think. Am I right, or does anybody have any information about that?
Okay, thank you, Louise. So I'm going to ask Mark to respond to those two questions. One has to do with economics. Natural gas is now selling, I think I heard on the radio, around $2 and some odd cents. Whereas to make it more profitable, I think the industry was saying that it had to be around $5 or above. So economically, is it feasible to undertake this industry right now? Is the first part of Louise's question. And the second question that she asked had to do with the casing. The casing is what's used to line the well that are drilled into the ground in order to be able to access the shale gas. Casing is made of cement. So what's the life expectancy of that casing? That's the second part of Louise's question. Do you need some more time, or are you okay? Okay, so since Mark has to spend some time activating those texts, which takes a little bit of practice, I'm going to suggest that the negative side respond to it first.
Assuming this is two questions, so I'm just going to respond to the economic question. Well, it's hard to do in 2 minutes to explain the economic business model for shale gas, but analysts and economists, both within the oil industry itself and from outside certainly, have referred to it as things like the shale gas bubble or a Ponzi scheme. Essentially, it's based upon getting a lot of money up front by saying you've got 1 trillion cubic feet of product on the ground based on nothing except the fact that you say that you have it. Because just like in the financial crisis, they deregulated the part of the industry where there used to be a formula for saying how much was down there. Now you can pretty much say whatever you want. So you get a lot of money, you come in, and so you start drilling. The peculiar thing about shale gas is you have to drill lots of wells for geological reasons, and also for the fact that they deplete incredibly rapidly. You usually get about 85 to 90% of your yield in the first year or two. So you've got these bank loans to pay and dividends to pay to investors, so you've got to keep drilling to pay that. It doesn't matter that the price of shale gas has come down to the point where you're actually making either no profit or you're selling at a loss, because you've got to maintain the cash flow to pay off these dividends and loans, so you keep drilling more and more and more. Well, what happens eventually is, what has happened this year is, you create such a glut on the market, there's way more supply, way more demand, way more supply than there is demand, and so the price kept dropping and dropping and dropping to historic lows. It's come back up a few pennies in the last couple of weeks, but what is happening in the industry now is a lot of these guys' stock prices has fallen through the floor. Many of them, they've cut back production a great deal. A lot of them are expected to go bankrupt, and there are analysts who are saying that we may even have seen the bursting of the shale gas bubble. But in any case, the industry is in trouble, even though you see it drilling and drilling and drilling, because they still got to pay those loans, even though they lose $3 of investment money when they sell it. They still have that $1 to pay the bank with. It's kind of complicated. That's as quick as I can do it in 2 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, so Jim just called me on that. He says that it's 2 questions, and it was not fair for him to use up his time to answer all 2 questions. He preferred to do the 1 question. So I'm going to ask Mark to respond to just the 1 question, and then we'll go back and pick up for the 2nd question again.
So the first question.
The first question had to do, is it economically feasible for this industry to be proceeding as is in New Brunswick?
The government position is in an editorial published in the Telegraph Journal, October 19th, 2011. Quote, "We're not suggesting that New Brunswick rush towards gas development since many important issues remain to be resolved, from the strength of the province's regulatory regime to its royalty structure. But there is no harm in permitting seismic exploration which ultimately adds to public knowledge about mineral wealth. Are these marketable reserves of shale gas or oil in New Brunswick? Will more deposits of potash be found? Could this province support a larger mining and gas extraction industry?" So the answer, they don't know the royalty structure, and it remains to be seen if they're going to proceed right away based on the depressed gas prices.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That was good. You read the text. There was a quote in there, and then you basically interpreted it in your own words, so you paraphrase, which is good. If you know these texts inside out, you can, I would suggest, just say what the text is telling us, but make sure that you give us the citation, exactly where it comes from. So the second part of the question had to do with well integrity. That is, when the industry drilled these wells and they line them up with cement, how long can that cement, or how long does that cement going to last? And I'm looking at a gentleman who might be able to answer that question for us. Mark?
The wells are drilled down sometimes 2 kilometers, and then they're drilled horizontally in clusters, and they can reach out as far as 3 kilometers. And of course, they're perforated with holes, and out of which are injected the slick water, which is water with a lot of chemicals in it. So once that hole is established, you have to cement it. In order to cement, you've got to pump down water through the well, through the hole, all the way to the end. That's 2 kilometers down, 3 kilometers back, and then that slurry must come all the way back up to the casing. And so it's got to be just liquid enough in order for it to make it all the way back to the casing without setting, and how can I say, solid, and enough of a solid slurry so it will set. So you've got this delicate balance between a slurry that can make it all the way back the 3 to 5 kilometers to the collar, and whether it will set prematurely. And of course, there are many instances of broken casing. When the casing breaks, which can be only a matter of a couple of inches thick, because the annulus is not going to be that much wider than the hole. The annulus is a sort of a bull a bit at the end of the drill machine, the drilling rod, which is larger than the drill pipes. And that annulus creates a larger, creates room for the cement to be pumped back into the hole and seal the hole. Of course, it's such a delicate procedure that there are going to be inevitably breaks in the cementing. On top of that, you can have breaks in the casing. Wherever the casing is coupling, you've got opportunities for corrosion, and there are a lot of corrosive materials that are pumped down there, including hydrochloric acid. So you've got a number of problems in both the slurry and at the pipes.
Okay, Okay, we have our first red card for the night. Jim?
Well, we thought this, Steph and I were saying that we think this is important enough to point out. Dr. Anthony Ingraffia, worldwide expert on this whole process, gave us some startling figures concerning this, and I think that they have to be out in the public realm. The actual rate of failure in the first year of a well, no matter where it's drilled in the world, no matter when it has been drilled, no matter what regulations are in place when it's drilled, 1 in every 20 wells will fail in the first year. Okay, so we're talking hundreds or thousands of wells eventually in New Brunswick. You can do the math and figure out how many hundreds of well failures there will be. Now, and it's important to point out that this is not because guys are trying to cut corners necessarily or anything bad that's being done by the drilling companies. This is just the chemistry and the physics and the geology all interacting, and it's 5 kilometers below the earth, and it just doesn't go right all the time. And I say these statistics are across time and space are the same, 1 in 20. He always gives a good comparison. He said the engineering specs for a bridge, every time you go across the Westmoreland Street Bridge, the engineers guarantee that is a 1 in 10 million chance that that bridge will fall down while you're doing it. If you take a jet airplane, you're guaranteed that there's only a 1 in 10 million chance that will crash. Those are the specifications it's built to. Come down to shale gas, we're talking about 1 in 20 wells will fail. So just trying to give a little perspective.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So I'm going to ask Mark to offer a rebuttal to that question with respect to well integrity. And then after that, I'm going to ask the first guest to come up and say a few words. And I just picked picked the names here randomly, and it so happened that I picked Matthew Hayes' name. So Matthew will have the opportunity to address us for 2 minutes. It's very rare we can control a politician and how long they speak.
I'll respond to this question by referring to a PDF document from the Natural Gas Group of the Province of New Brunswick website from the fall 2011. And this document has not changed since then. Reported cases of groundwater contamination associated with shale gas have been linked to casing failures due to poor well construction or over-pressurization of wells, especially older wells with less vigorous standards. New Brunswick's current regulations and directives set out requirements to set surface casing well below groundwater, surface to cement the surface, and pressure test. There are also requirements for intermediate casing where installed and production casing. Requirements to prepare inadequate cementing jobs and/or abandoned wells have also been set out. Abandoned oil and gas wells in the Stony Creek area of New Brunswick have been thoroughly studied, accounted for, and properly decommissioned. So the answer from the government is that they will ensure that the casing around the vertical well is, the integrity is preserved and tested. And second, the well, after it's been exhausted of its natural gas, will be properly decommissioned.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So, Mr. Hayes, would you like to come up and have a say for 2 minutes?
Hi, thanks for allowing me the space to talk here. I just want to say that, there's a lot of talk about risks, and it's important to recognize that these risks can also be managed. And this is what the experts on the engineering side of things are saying. So let's recognize that the risks can be managed, but that how those risks are defined are not just an engineering question. They're also defined and come to be known by a series of other experts, many of whom have spoken here. And those risks are profound. When you're talking about risks, you're talking about the possibility of accidents. I suspect that one of the reasons why SWIN and other companies want to frack in New Brunswick, despite the low cost, is because they need to gather more data on their techniques so they can improve them, right? And make it possible to frack more in the future at lower risks. So that means that people in New Brunswick are being experimented on. And I don't think that that is acceptable in any way, shape, or form. A month ago, no one thought that Mayor Woodside could be threatened by anyone, let alone me. If on Monday Mayor Woodside is slain at the ballot box, it will be because, in part, of this issue. And people in this province will take notice. The people in this province are no longer satisfied with leadership at the political level, at any level, province, federal, or municipal, that kowtows to the interests of some. This will change, in a sense, the landscape in the province, and you have a major role to play in it. And I would appreciate your support on Monday in making that a reality, because I think that it's a very close election, and I'm going to apologize, both for going over time, but also because I'm going to head out the door and knock on more doors, so that on Monday we have a government in Fredericton that we can trust.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, we will now continue with the question and answer period. Who would like to come up to the microphone next? Could you please state your name?
Yeah, my name is Joe Bonnaby, former resident of Fredericton, present in Moncton. I want to make a brief statement and a question. In November 2006, I did a presentation at City Hall, and it was for the research that we're doing in Turtle Creek, our watershed. I did extensive research and found out they were seismic testing for future drilling in our watershed that supplies water from Moncton, Brigham, and Dieppe. Somehow the provincial government was made aware that I was going to do a presentation. They sent 3 people down from Natural Resources to do a presentation ahead of me. But anyway, my question is, why would the New Brunswick government not look into amending the Environmental Act, the Clean Water Act, the Potable Water Act, in anticipation of exploration for our resources, to protect our resources and to have safe economic development on our resources? This was requested in November 2006 in Moncton, and it's public knowledge, public record too.
Okay, so let me see if I properly understood. In 2006, there was a presentation made which suggested that in order for the province to be able to protect us from industrial development, there had to be some improvements to these acts.
Exactly, to protect our resources, at the same time have safe economic development.
Okay, so the question is why? Why hasn't the government improved our acts accordingly?
So, exactly.
Thank you. Okay, so Mark, you'd like a few more? You take that right now? Okay.
In July 2011, Minister Bruce Northrup, announced regulations announced were just a first step towards, quote, world-class, unquote, environmental protections for New Brunswick. He promised the provincial government would release a full shale gas action plan by March 2012. We haven't seen that plan yet. The latest from April 11th, 2012 is that the province of New Brunswick says that the shale gas exploration rules will be ready by month's end. It's now May. Up to now, so in terms of getting to world-class environmental protections, there are two things that seem a bit contrary to that. Last year in March, the wetland protection policies of this province were changed. And we had a wetlands predictive map that was actually world-class, and that was stopped by Minister Margaret M. Blaney. Later that summer, in July 2011, a total of, I believe, 19 watershed groups in the province were notified that the water classification system that all of those groups had worked over a decade in preparing was going to be shelved. And so on both fronts, the government has made very significant changes in the protection policies for both our wetlands and both our watersheds.
Okay, Mark, thanks. So we heard that there were some new regulations, world-class regulations that were coming out very soon, but we also heard that the government has been sort of downplaying or retrograding some of the current legislation.
But you gotta put the right spin to it, Mark. You're representing the government.
Mark answered the question for me. I was going to say, in fact, the government is amending our legislation around water protection particularly, and Mark already outlined. But basically, in 2009, or coming in 2010, the provincial government was working on a comprehensive water management strategy for the province. So a process and a document that would inventory the water resources that we have, and a process of identifying how we would then manage those resources going into the future, and that would assume to include something like shale gas exploration, given the amount of water that it requires. So that's been taken off the shelf. They're no longer working on that in that current form anyway. And then we had wetland legislation roll back. We had about 50% of wetlands that exist on the landscape no longer requiring any sort of permitting process whatsoever. So if it's not on a map that is posted on Service New Brunswick GeoNB database, it's not a wetland, even though it's clearly a wetland. We also, as Mark said, have a water classification program that watershed associations across the province worked for over a decade on collecting water quality data that contributed to a classification system, surface water quality standards, basically, for 22 watersheds. And just recently the government announced that they're no longer moving forward with implementing the regulation that would legally bind new resource activities, proponents, to maintain the standard that was classified, the work that was done to classify that. So from that, we can take that standard, that legally binding standard, is too stringent to allow resource extraction activities like shale gas and open pit mining. Right on time.
Oh, we have a red card from the government side. This should be interesting.
On June 23rd, 2011, the government of New Brunswick announced stronger regulations to strengthen the regulatory framework for oil and natural gas exploration, development, and production in the province. Under these requirements, oil and natural gas companies that wish to engage in exploration, development, and production in New Brunswick must: 1. Conduct baseline testing on all potable water wells located within a minimum distance of 200 meters of seismic testing and 500 meters of drilling for oil or natural gas before these operations can begin. These are minimum distance regulations that must be met prior to commencement of operations and may be increased depending upon the situation. 2, provide full disclosure of all proposed and actual contents of any fluids, chemicals, and additives used in the hydraulic fracturing process. And 3, establish a security bond to protect property owners and taxpayers from the impact of industrial accidents, including the loss of or contamination of drinking water. The burden of proof in the event of such an accident will rest with the operator.
Thank you, Mark. That was a good, strong comeback. Do we have another question from the audience, please? Could you please state your name?
Susan Head here. My name is Stan Dunnan, resident of the village of Doetown. My question is directed to the affirmative, in particular to our Premier, Mr. Allward. Did you not last fall, in an effort to alleviate the concerns and concerns that New Brunswickers had with this new industry, hydrofracking, that you stated to your MLAs that they should have open meetings, town hall meetings on a regular basis? Now this hasn't happened. Has this change been a new thing in your economic development? And by the way, it's nice to see you, Mr. Premier, here tonight to set an example for your MLAs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Donovan. I've lost track. Where's my secretary? Who answered? Who was assigned to answer first the last question? Maybe that's putting you on the spot. I think Mark did. Yes, yes. Okay, so this should be the negative side. All right, so putting the negative side on the spot.
You have nothing to say.
The question is addressed to the Premier. Why is it that having made a promise or a pledge last October in Moncton, there was a speech that he delivered whereby he said that he would engage the public everywhere across the province on this very issue through town hall meetings, such as we're having tonight. So the question was, how come it's not been happening? And why does it have to be done by a group of volunteers? So, is there anyone from the negative side who would like to address that? No?
What he said.
What he said. Well, I tried to be fair. I shall have to hand it over to the affirmative side.
Thank you for giving the government an opportunity to respond. In Premier David Allward's speech to the Moncton Rotary Club, Chamber of Commerce and Enterprise Greater Moncton on October 3, 2011, the question was, why are the MLAs not having any town hall meetings? I have learned through my own MLA here in Fredericton, Brian McDonald, that my words were misinterpreted. So perhaps I'll read the portion of the speech that I gave in October 3, 2011 to clarify what I said. Going forward, the website of the Natural Gas Group will contain lots of useful information from a variety of experts and sources. To further reach out to New Brunswickers, Minister Northrup, assisted by experts from government, will be holding online forums to answer questions from New Brunswickers. Furthermore, government MLAs will be holding town hall and information meetings in their respective ridings this month, that's in October, to hear directly from their constituents on this important issue. So I urge all New Brunswickers to make the most of this consultation program. It's a way to become informed about shale gas development and use that knowledge to make a decision on what is best for New Brunswick. In so doing, every New Brunswicker will be engaged in a vitally important public discussion about something that matters to us all.